And leading up to the murders, was she anxious about anything?
She had a conversation with me. A few months prior. I walked in the house and Maggie said, "Hey, Blanc," she said, "I got to talk to you. I got something to tell you." And so she said, "Let me make some coffee." And she went and made a pot of coffee. She made me a cup. She made herself a cup, and we went. She said, "Let's go talk." And we went into the hunting room, and she closed the door because Alec was sleeping in the bedroom, which is on the other side of the house, but she closed the door. When Maggie closed the door,
Your side.
No response.
Judge, I think, was she anxious about money issues?
Your Honor. I object to.
Well, I know you objected, and
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Well, a big reaction from Dick Harpootlian on the sensitive issue of what Maggie thought or feared about the financial situation they were facing, the financial situation Alex was facing in the lead up to her murder. And the point is that Maggie knew something fishy was going on with Alex, and that was a threat to Alex, wasn't it? Now, according to law enforcement, Alex told Maggie that Randolph, his 81-year-old father, was in failing health and she needed to see him before he died. That was the premise that drew her to Moselle, that his father was dying, right? And she needed to come there to, basically say goodbye to him. The irony is, I'm not sure if she did. Did she go and see Randolph? And I think the even greater irony is that his alibi was supposed to be that he went to see his father, but instead he went to see his mother. Do you see, if he did go to see his father, it made no sense not to take Maggie along. I mean, if the whole thing was a ploy to lure Maggie there, not to see his father, but in order to murder her, then it also made no sense to take Maggie along during that alibi phase, right? But in terms of his own narrative, if she'd been summoned to Moselle for that reason, to go and see his father, then it made no sense not to take Maggie along. The other thing that's interesting to consider is the special interest that Alex took in Maggie's phone after he killed her. He also took some interest in Paul's phone. I think it was taken out and propped on his body at the scene. But the irony is, had he taken Paul's phone and assessed what was going on and gotten a clear idea, perhaps he could have avoided the pickle that was waiting for him in a Carolina courtroom. That wouldn't have been the surprise that it was, the curveball that it was. Instead, he took a particular interest in Maggie's phone. Why do you think that is? And I think another question to ask is, why were Maggie and Paul targets and not Buster? Also, and we're going to answer that question, also, who did Murdaugh think of first? And when the murderous psychology started crystallizing, who first sort of came up in the crosshairs of his mind? Who do you think it was, Maggie or Paul? Because Murdaugh's date with Mark Tinsley, representing Mallory Beach's mother, that was scheduled for June 10th. And that makes one think Paul was Alex's main priority to get rid of, right? But the thing that seemed to set Alex off on the 7th was news that his firm had found out that he owed them money. It was one thing to get rid of Paul. Maybe some of his troubles would be delayed if he did get rid of Paul. But getting rid of Maggie, who was co-owner of the Edisto property and owner of Moselle, meant that Alex could suddenly get a huge cash injection when he needed it most. So Paul's death seemed to be about limiting further losses, while Maggie's was about gaining her share, taking over her share, inheriting her share, while also limiting potential losses, say in a potential possible divorce, including the financial audit that would arise from that. And, if Maggie had suspicions and Maggie was allowed to live, then Maggie would probably have testified against Alex in this trial, in any trial. If someone else was killed or if it was a trial about finances, Maggie would probably be a star witness against him. We also know that Maggie drafted her will in 2005, and guess what? She left everything for her husband. But a year ago, in March 2022, headlines suggested that more recently, the departed Maggie had no money to begin with. Do you think that that's true? And so we're going to drill into this aspect. We want to talk about, was there really just $58 in Maddie Murdaugh's bank account? Was she really killed? If the motive was money, and I've been saying that all along, that the motive was greed, was Maggie really killed for $58 in her bank account? But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Thank you for the thousands of you who have recently subscribed. Welcome to the channel. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So there's an article from Fitz News dated March 29, 2022, a long-form article, really worth reading, and we're going to drill down into some of those details. And they have to do with Maggie's money. And the article points out that nearly 10 months after Paul and Maggie's bodies were found, after their murders in Colleton County, new documents filed in the probate court shed light on the suspicious financial situation of this powerful family, the Murdaugh family. And the investigative sources told Fitz News that they were following the money. They were investigating this case by following the money to find answers. And so this then raised this question: was Maggie Murdaugh really cash poor? Was she really struggling financially? And the article goes on then to point out the following. Maggie had just $57.77 in her Bank of America account. That was the only account with Maggie's name listed as, her sole account. In Maggie and Alex's joint Palmetto State bank accounts, Maggie's share was only $4,000. It was more, but it was only $4,154. But that was an account she shared with Alex. And now let's go into the substance of this article. It says, quote, now $4,154 is a lot of money to a lot of people, but not the Murdaugh, especially considering that Alex Murdaugh is accused of stealing nearly $9 million. So, if you've got $9 million, why does your bank account, why has it got small change in it? Anyway, so it goes on to say, one of those Palmetto State bank accounts Maggie shared with Alex only had $16 in it. So you've got one bank account with barely $60, another bank account with $16, and then another one with about $4,000. It's still, aren't these supposed to be rich people? And so the article goes on to ask the rhetorical question, did somebody drain Maggie's accounts around the time that she died? Were the Murdaughs in deep financial trouble in June? Now, going back to the article, now we can talk about the brothers, Randy and John, and their role in dealing with the estates, but I don't really want to make the conversation about them just yet. We will deal with that. But what I want to deal with now is this interesting thing where when they actually assessed Maggie's estate, So when Maggie actually died, she actually had $4.16 million in total real estate holdings, right? And it's basically combining her ownership of Moselle and Edisto. 4.16 million, right? Now, if you think about it, it's almost like an analogy, an allegory to, she actually owns 4.16 million, but the amount of money in her one account is 4,154. But actually, she owns over $4 million, and it's kind of in real estate. And then you start to wonder what is really going on. It looks like she doesn't have any money, but actually she's a multimillionaire. She's worth millions. And so you see that Alex sold Moselle to Maggie in 2016 for $5. But over $2 million was owed in mortgages on both of the properties. So you have this fairly complicated arrangement where someone owns assets, but in terms of their debts, there's a bit of a weird labyrinth going on. Who is actually supposed to pay these debts? Now, about $2.1 million was owed in mortgages on both properties. So Maggie owns $4 million in real estate, but $2 million is owed on those properties. Now, who's supposed to pay that? And so you can go through the article. It refers to some of the mortgage costs, mortgage debt, $847,000 owed on the $1 million Moselle mortgage initiated in 2015. Another $1.1 million owed on the second Moselle mortgage of $1.3 million from 2013. $208,000. These are huge amounts of money owed on the Edisto mortgage, the home purchased by Alex and Maggie in 2002, originally for $415,000. Appreciated pretty well. And so the article kind of points out they weren't paying their mortgages. And then you have John Murdaugh's name come up, that John wanted to sell Moselle to pay off $2 million in debt, in mortgage debt held by Palmetto State Bank, which is a family-owned Hampton County bank that had also been accused of playing a role in Murdaugh's financial crimes. According to the probate documents, according to this article, Maggie owned an estimated $111,000, over $100,000 in other assets. She had $85,000. She had a Mercedes worth over $85,000. She had another vehicle, a 2014 Ford F-150, valued at $12,000. Another Ford F-150 valued at $8,000. That's 3 vehicles. If you add all of that together, it comes to about $100,000 for those 3 vehicles. And then there's a 4th vehicle, a 2012 Land Rover, valued at $6,500. And then it sort of asks, the question kind of comes up, did Maggie have a life insurance policy? And this article says, unfortunately, the documents don't provide the answer. Also that this is one of the biggest questions surrounding Maggie's murder. And I've made the same argument. The Murdaughs have made created a legacy, created their wealth, created millions, made money by suing insurance companies through their law firm. And then they don't actually take out life insurance on themselves. And so the article kind of concludes saying, are we really supposed to believe that Maggie wouldn't have had life insurance? And to me, the fact that we don't know the answer is very interesting. Now, if we go to the Daily Mail, it says that Maggie's estate was valued at $4.3 million, right? And has been settled after her husband Alex sought to keep her millions in his family. And wasn't that what he needed to do? Wasn't that what he wanted to do? At the time of Maggie's death, according to the article, Moselle was no longer a home for her. It was an asset. Just think about those words. When Maggie was murdered, she didn't live in Moselle. It wasn't her home. She was summoned there. And why do you think she was actually summoned there? What did she have of value that somebody else wanted? Well, isn't the answer Moselle? Someone else is living on Moselle, but it belongs to Maggie. And all that Moselle is to Maggie is an asset. And guess what? Maggie's got a will, and the sole benefactor in her will is Alex Murdaugh. And so the Daily Mail article goes on to say, quote, records show that Murdaugh was at pains to shield from the creditors and victims we now know that he defrauded over the years of misappropriation of funds and embezzlement, that he was trying to shield, for example, the Moselle property from the creditors that were out there, that he knew were out there. Probate law is quite complicated, but apparently in December 2016, Murdaugh sold Moselle an estate worth $3 million to Maggie for $5 and love and affection. And they're basically saying that was fraudulent because he knew that he owed money to creditors and victims. Basically putting that estate in Maggie's name meant that these creditors and victims couldn't come after the asset, the Moselle asset, because it was no longer on Alex Murdaugh's name. But that was a fraud as well, because he knew about that. So it's clear that on June 7th, Alex Murdaugh likely felt he wanted Moselle back. And if not Moselle, then Maggie's Edisto property. He was ready to cash out. His debts were catching up to him. His creditors were catching up to him. And I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. It's not that he tried so hard to shield these properties from the creditors. So it's not like, well, now I want to unshield them. I think what was really going on is he wanted indirect control of it, in the sense that it would go into a trust, right? And so it would be shielded and protected within that. And there's a lot within, when you create a trust, the law doesn't have the power to find out exactly what is going on in terms of the private financial information regarding a trust. And so this is where the expertise of lawyers succeeds in confounding the efforts to bring someone to justice. And if you think about it in a very simple way, couldn't Alex simply have asked nicely, can I have Moselle back? I gave it to you for $5. Can I have it back? My father's dying. Can I have it back? Maggie, do you mind giving me Moselle? Is that okay? Well, no, not if they're estranged. Not if she knows that he's facing a lawsuit for $30 million. Not if she could potentially lose her home and she wants to hold on to interest that she has, and she's done nothing wrong. And so I think one's got to think about Maggie being the very first person to figure out that Alex was up to something. I'm talking about years ago, 15 years ago during the affair. But compared to all the people in the story, who was probably on to Alex Murdaugh first? You might say it could be the housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield, or even the little detective. But wasn't it actually his wife? I mean, she was basically estranged from him because she knew things were up. And the housekeeper that testified said that she was anxious about money and knew that he wasn't being honest with her. So don't you agree that Maggie was on to him first, wasn't that why Maggie had to be done away with? According to ABC7, quote, Maggie Murdaugh was worried about money possibly being demanded of her family in a lawsuit and suspicious her husband wasn't being entirely honest with her in the days before the killing. And maybe to some extent she was confronting him about that. Anyway, the housekeeper, Blanca, said, quote, that Maggie was concerned about the amount of money that they were requesting in that lawsuit, $30 million. And she said she knew the amount of money they were asking, but she felt that Alex was not being truthful to her with regard to what was going on with that lawsuit. She said, he doesn't tell me everything. And so maybe Alex didn't tell her about the $30 million that was being demanded, and yet she found out about the $30 million somewhere else, and now she's actually getting concerned. So if only Maggie had suspected the financial stars were aligning in terms of this looming lawsuit and Randolph's failing health and her unclear role in the calculus of all this, can you see that she was right to be suspicious? She was right to be anxious. She was right to be alarmed. If only she'd listened to her sixth sense. Had she refused to return to Murdaugh, had she gotten a divorce lawyer sort of signed on and begun this process of an audit, think about how many other lives she could have saved as well, or protected the clients from ruin if she'd acted sooner. And as I say, if she'd refused to return to Murdaugh, based on her sixth sense, she could have saved not only her own life, but Paul's as well. So I'm not going to take it further than that in terms of Maggie's finances, but can you see that there's a huge discrepancy between how much money she seems to have in her bank accounts and how much money she actually has? And now we want to try and understand the financial instruments used to create this shield so that you can steal money from someone, but people can't get that money back, right? And so we're going to deal with that when we deal with Randolph's money. And that is quite an interesting story as well. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.